Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in our series of Edge of Eternities Commander deck techs. Since EOE is Magic's last in-universe set for 2025, I want to showcase some of the cool Commander options that the set has given us beyond just the ones from the precons. I'm releasing a new Edge of Eternities Commander deck every Thursday through the end of September when the Spider-Man set drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. So if you have a request for a specific Commander, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today, our commander is Tannuk, Steadfast second. A former pilot in the Cavaron Memorial Navy, Tannuk is the first mate and flight engineer of the Sarima and is Sammy's best friend. He has a phobia of making choices, a trait which collides interestingly with fate when he and Sammy find the End Stone together. As usual, I'm linking the Edge of Eternities story in the description below because it's just so good. But for now, before we get into the deck tech, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build around my commander. I want to show off why they're cool and why I put them in the command zone. So I put about 30 cards toward their game plan. It's what I want to do while I'm playing the deck and how I try to win. 30 more cards go into support for that game plan in the form of card advantage like draw spells, acceleration like ramp, and interaction like spot removal. I do some mass removal as well in the form of 1 or 2 wraths. Sometimes I do none, sometimes more if it feeds to my game plan. And then I have a floor of 38 lands in my land base because I want to cast my spells. So, let's talk about our commander. Tannuk Steadfast second is a 3/5 legendary Kavu pilot for 2 and double red that says other creatures you control have haste, and artifact cards and red cards in your hand have warp for 2 and a red. Now, to remind everyone, warp means this is an alternate casting cost. You can pay with Tannuk 2 and a red to cast the spell. That spell will resolve, presumably, enter the battlefield, and at the end of turn, during your end step, you'll get a trigger that exiles that card, which you can then cast for its regular mana cost on a later turn. So it's sort of like a built-in adventure for a permanent. Rather than it being a second spell, however, it is just the card itself, and then it goes away at the end of turn. It's been likened to a lot of different mechanics, but in any case, Tannuk is the warp commander. You get to warp things in, you get to have them for a moment, maybe that's all you need them for, and the best part is, warp does not grant haste, but Tannuk does. So it seems like Tannuk lends himself to powering out big value pieces, which is always a fun strategy, but it's a little superficial. To really know what's going on in this deck, you need to think about Tannuk's character. He's smart and loyal and, steadfast. But he's also risk-averse and indecisive. He doesn't want to take chances. He wants to know what's coming. And what better way to avoid uncertainty than to try everything? Our deck is full of scary creatures and intimidating artifacts we can warp in. Many of them come with enters effects that help us or hurt our opponents, or both, while others give us value when we attack with the haste that Tannuk grants them. All those cards only cost us 2 and a red to cast, so our mana commitments are minimal. Then they vanish into exile, leaving only the knowledge of exactly how useful they are. With that, we don't have to guess what's best for us to recast. We know. We also have synergy pieces to help us further avoid tough decisions. We can flicker warped permanents that we like rather than rebuying them, we can sacrifice the ones we don't like to find something better, and we can copy any of them to remove all uncertainty. All the while, we're blasting through space and leaving little left in our wake to get in the way of what we warp in next. The deck is designed to make our turns feel as simple and inevitable as possible, letting us stay calm and cozy in our cockpit as the universe speeds past. And thanks to relativity, everyone left on the ground is experiencing something much more fast and frightening, our deck rocketing through their life totals faster than light, warping the game around us until we're surrounded by nothing but the void of space and twinkling stars where our opponents used to be. This is a good deck for players who love dropping large, game-changing creatures into play, and those who just want to go big before they go home. So let's get into this. As usual, I have tagged all the cards that we're going to be seeing today. The Moxfield list is in the video's description, so please check it out. And at the bottom of that list, you'll see a considering section with a bunch of other options, some of which will give you the ability to build this deck for a tighter budget, some of which I cut simply because they would have made the deck much more expensive, so they're more powerful. or if you want to take it in a different direction, there's lots there to get you started. For now, we're going to look at the biggest section here, which is Warp. There are 40 cards tagged with Warp in this deck. I want to be clear that not every card in the deck that can be warped with Tannuk is tagged with Warp, just the ones that it's best to choose to do so. So we have a few creatures, for example, that we could be warping in, but I felt like it was better to just cast them. These are the ones that if we want to warp them in, it's either advantageous to us or best for us to do so. But they're not just creatures, as we can see from our first one here. Cursed Mirror is 2 and a red for an artifact that taps for red, so this is just a manalith for us. But as it enters the battlefield, we may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, except that it has haste. So if we have warped in a big creature with Tannuk, something that we want to either get advantage from with attacking with it with haste, or maybe it has a good enters effect, or something along those lines, we can play Cursed Mirror afterwards, and then we can get that as well. The only reason we might want to play Cursed Mirror using Tannuk, rather in terms of like warping it in, rather than just casting it, is because maybe we want this effect of it copying a creature a second time on the next turn. Maybe we have 2 creatures in hand and 6 mana available to us. We can warp one of them in, then warp in the Cursed Mirror, have it come in as a copy of that first creature, do something with both of them, and then that creature and the Cursed Mirror will go away. On our next turn, we can warp in that second creature we had in hand and just play the Cursed Mirror so that it copies that now second creature that's also been warped in. And at the end of that turn, Cursed Mirror is just going to turn into a tapped mana rock. Tapped because presumably we attacked with it. So lots that's fun to do here with Cursed Mirror. Next we have Professional Facebreaker from Streets of New Capenna. I love New Capenna. For 2 and a red, we get a 2/3 human warrior with menace that says whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. And sacrifice a treasure to exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. Just like Cursed Mirror, we can warp this in, or we can simply play it. Either way is fine. I've got it in here to be warped in case we wanted to have that option, because something that's not used that much when it comes to warp is the fact that it's not on the battlefield after our turn is over, which means it's not targetable. It's not something that we can have removed. If it looks like our opponents are gearing up for a board wipe, maybe we don't want the Facebreaker to stick around. We want to be able to keep making treasure later on. But in general, this is here so that when we slam in with our many, many creatures, we're going to get treasures out of it, and we can use those treasures either for their normal use of making mana for us, or the Facebreaker lets us turn them into Impulse Draw that we might want to use as well. Notably, exiling those cards and saying we can play them this turn, it says play, so if we exile a land, we could play it if we haven't made our land drop already. And if it's a creature or an artifact, we can sure warp it in with Tannuk. Because Tannuk doesn't say that the ability is only usable for cards in our hand. So next up, we have Defiler of Instinct from Dominaria United. For 2 and double red, we get a 4/4 Phyrexian Kavu. Hey, it's a Kavu, just like Tannuk. That has first strike. It also says its second ability essentially just means for your red permanents, you can treat one of their red pips as though it was Phyrexian red. That's essentially what it does. Which interacts with Tannuk. Because it doesn't say that it changes the red mana in the casting cost. It's just as an initial cost to cast a red permanent spell. Warp is an alternate casting cost. This is an additional cost. They don't overlap, we can apply them both. So if we say we want to warp something in for 2 and a red with Tannuk, we can, as an additional cost, pay 2 life, and then it reduces that red out of there, so we're able to play the spell, to cast the spell, for simply 2 generic and 2 life. So it's a little bit of, in that way, ramp. It also works even if we're not warping it in, of course, if it's a red spell. But in addition, whenever we cast a red permanent spell, this creature deals 1 damage to any target. So We may be able to kill some creatures with this. We may be able to finish some creatures off. Maybe we've attacked with something else. And in any case, we can warp this in for one red less than it costs, and then maybe reduce the cost of some of our other spells if we're willing to spend life on it, and then get a little bit of pinging in the process. Next up is Erratic Portal. This is a sweet card. I'm using the Mystery Booster 2 Future Sight frame here just because there are not that many others. But yeah, this is a 4 generic mana artifact with 1 ability. Pay 1 and tap to return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays a generic mana. So we can use this as kind of janky removal. If we have an opponent that's tapped out, we could pay 1 and tap this to unsummon one of their creatures. But really, this is for us. We can use this on our own creatures. If we are to warp something in with Tannuk, you're using the ability that Tannuk has, that Tannuk gives to all of our creatures. We can get the Ender's Effect, we can attack with it, we can force our opponent to make difficult blocks. And then either before our creature's about to die, or before it's about to leave the battlefield at the end step during, thanks to the warp mechanic, we can just bounce it to our hand. If we really want to, maybe we have a creature that comes in and spreads out some damage just on its Ender's Effect. We can warp that out, then use Erratic Portal to bounce it, then warp it out again, and do that as many times as we feel like. Erratic Portal is super fun and very flexible in this deck, even though it has kind of a narrow use. That narrow use is the entirety of our deck, so it's a fun include. Next is the Golden Argosy from Dominaria United again. For 4 generic mana, this is a 3/6 vehicle with crew 1 that says when it attacks, we exile each creature that crewed it this turn, then return them to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This is, much like our Erratic Portal, a great way for us to cheat around the warp costs. If we don't want to get multiple Ender's Effects from having to warp something in, then on a later turn cast it for its full mana cost, we can just warp it in, use it to crew the Argosy, attack with the Argosy, and those warped permanents will just go into exile until our end step, at which point they will enter as new objects that aren't getting exiled again using warp. They just come back in. We get their second Ender's Effect, if they have one, right away. They do come in tapped, but we didn't have to pay to cast them again, and we still got 2 uses out of them. And even if the Argosy dies in the process, this still works. It just creates a delayed trigger where the creature or creatures that crewed it will come back. Without us having to pay for it again or pay to warp it again. Pretty nice. We got the Argosy in here just like we have the Erratic Portal in the warp section because we can warp them. And even if we warp the Argosy in, it's a vehicle, so we can then crew it, and it has haste thanks to Tannuk. Next we have, this one's really fun, the Mirror of Life Trapping. Another non-creature, but for 4 generic mana, we get an artifact that says whenever a creature enters, if it was cast, exile it. Then return all other permanent cards exiled with this artifact to the battlefield under their owner's control. This does not say whenever a creature enters under our control. This affects everyone's creatures. So it's maybe not the best thing to play if we have other players who are taking advantage of Panharmonicon type effects. Maybe they're playing the Elishnorn Mother of Machines, or Yargle. Not Yargle, I'm so sorry. The Sultai one from Dominaria that doubles your Ender's effects. In any case, if we have someone else that's taking advantage of a lot of Ender's effects from their creatures, it may not be great to double up their things, but maybe it's worth it, because this only triggers once our creatures have entered the battlefield. Once they enter, we get our Ender's effects, and this triggers at the same time, assuming we cast that creature. We will exile it under the mirror, and then the next time another creature enters the battlefield, whatever we had cast before will re-enter as the first thing is exiled. that means we get a second enters trigger. We just have to wait for the second thing. So we can say, maybe we have like a 9 drop and a 10 drop. We can warp the first one in, then warp the second one in, and the mirror will have exiled the first one, and that first one will come back when it exiles the second one. So essentially there's only one creature trapped under the mirror at once. This lets us not just double up on our enters triggers, but also, again, cheat around warp. We don't have to worry about our creatures that were exiled with the mirror and then came back, leaving the battlefield at the end of turn thanks to warp, because they are a new game object as far as the rules are concerned. So lots of fun. We can even warp in the mirror if we really want that to happen just for us and not for our opponents for at least a turn. We warp this in, then we warp in another creature of ours, and then a second creature. We cast a second creature. Yeah. The only thing we want to be careful of with that is this is not like an Oblivion Ring. It's not like everything under the mirror comes back when the mirror leaves. So something to keep in mind. Seems like fun. Next up, we have Nyx Lotus. Nyx Lotus is probably not great for us to warp in, now that I'm looking at it, because it comes in tapped. Why does it have the warp tag? Great question, me. Let's take that off. We'll talk about the Nyx Lotus soon. Alright, the Sad Robot. Obviously, everyone loves the Sad Robot. Solemn Simulacrum is a 4-drop. It's a 2/2 golem. When it comes in, we Rampant Growth. When it dies, we draw a card. So we warp this in, we get to Rampant Growth. We've got it until end of turn. Then next turn, we cast it again. We get to Rampant Growth the second time. The classic example of doubling up on our enters triggers. Especially since we're in a mono red deck, and while we have a lot of cards in the ramp section of this deck, being able to get our lands into play is at a premium. But speaking of ramp, we have a little more right here in the form of the Fire Crystal from Final Fantasy. For 2 and double red, we have a legendary artifact that makes all of our red spells cost 1 generic less to cast. That does apply to warp costs. So if we warp something in, remember that's just an alternate casting cost. It doesn't mean that cost additions and cost reductions don't apply to it. And the spell is being cast, and the spell's still red, presumably. So we can warp things in while the Fire Crystal's in play, if they are red creatures that is, for just 1 and a red. That seems pretty good. It also, as a backup to Tannuk, gives all of our creatures haste, and for 4 and double red, we can tap it to make a token. That's a copy of a target creature we control that we have to sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So this is another way for us to double up on the value we get from our creatures, whether it's enters triggers, whether it's attack triggers, might be damage triggers, any of that's helpful. I mean, even just getting a giant creature out, warped out, and then we spend 6 mana to make a second copy of it, that might be worth it. Next up, we have Wild Magic Sorcerer. A little more expensive than I'd like it to be as a in terms of currency, but for a 3 and a red, we get a 4/3 Orc Shaman. This is the first spell we cast from exile each turn has Cascade. This is one of our synergy pieces, because every time we warp something in, if it does leave the battlefield at the end of turn thanks to that warp, it goes into exile and we can cast it from there. So if we've warped in a big creature, done something with it, and we've got Wild Magic Sorcerer in play, the next turn, if we are able to cast that big creature, when we cast it, we can cascade into something. But what is Cascade? If you don't know, Cascade means when you cast a spell with Cascade, you exile cards from the top of your library until you hit a non-land that costs less than whatever spell you're cascading from, which you can then cast for free. And then all the other cards that you cascaded through go on the bottom of your library in a random order. So essentially you just flip cards off the top of your library until you find a spell that costs less than whatever would have cascaded. Everything else goes on the bottom. Since we have so many big creatures in here, big spells in general, it may be the case that we cascade from something small, but we're likely to cascade from something big, and we're pretty likely to cascade into something big. So pretty nice. Next up, we have Elena, Kessig Trapper. Love Elena. If you want to take a look at the playlist of Pride decks on my channel, you'll see I built a Pride deck with the Gay Kings and the Gruul Friends, of which Elena is one. In any case, Elena Kessig Trapper is 4 and a red for a 4/3 legendary human scout with first strike. That says tap to add an amount of red mana equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that entered this turn. And she has partner, which isn't relevant here. So if we are warping things in with haste, those things are coming in, they entered this turn, we can then tap Elena to make a bunch of red mana and warp in some other things, or just cast something. If we, warp in something with 9 power, we can tap Elena to make 9 red mana, and we can use that to cast, or rather to warp in 3 more things, or maybe just to cast something that costs 9 or less. We can also, if we want to, warp in Elena, because when she comes in, she'll have haste thanks to Tannuk. So we paid 3 to warp her in, and we can immediately tap her for 4, so we're mana positive on that. Pretty nice. Next, we have another way to cheat our warped creatures into play without having to pay for them a second time. It's Conjurer's Closet. For 5 generic mana, it's an artifact that says at the beginning of our end step, we may exile a creature we control and then return to the battlefield under our control. It's just flicker something. It's optional, because it says may, but we can warp something in, maybe get some good value out of it, then flicker it rather than warp it out again, and we get the value again. If you're wondering exactly how this works, this triggers at the beginning of the end step, so does the delayed trigger for warp. So because we control both of those triggers and they're triggering from the same event, which is going into our end step, we get to stack them however we want. So we put the Conjurer's Closet trigger on top of the delayed warp trigger, and it will resolve first. And then when the warp trigger tries to exile our creature, it can't find it because the creature has come back as a new game object. So we get to keep it. That's Conjurer's Closet. Hey, now for Pig Daddy. It's Alarg the Raiseboar from the Ward of the Spark. For 3 and double red, we get a legendary boar god that is a 6/6 trample that says, whenever it attacks, we may put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, then we return that creature to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. Which is to say, we've got a lot of big things in this deck. All we have to do is attack with Alarg, which if Tannuk's out, Alarg has haste, and we get to get something out similar to Warp, but it just comes in tapped and attacking. We're already slamming in with it. And if that thing lives, it'll go back to our hand if we don't have it die, of course, or flicker it. Or Mirror of Light trapping it, something along those lines. In addition, we can't lose Alarg, because when it dies or it's put into exile from the battlefield, we can put it back into our library third from the top. Now we probably don't want to do that if we have warped it in, but we can if we feel like it. If we don't want to cast Alarg for its full value next turn, we could always just, when it warps away, just send it back to our library. When it dies, we'll just send it back to our library. We're going to keep getting Pig Daddy back over and over and over and being able to cheat out our creatures and get a lot of value from them the same way that we're getting with Warp, just for a different cost rather than having to pay the 2 and a red to warp them in. Ilarg is just putting them in when we attack with them. Next up, we have Radiant Performer. This is a really cool card from the Strixhaven Commander decks. For 3 and double red, we get a 2/2 human wizard with flash, which means if Tannuk is in play, we can flash this in using warp on an opponent's turn. So when Radiant Performer enters the battlefield, if we cast it from our hand, we choose target spell or ability that targets only a single permanent or player. We make a copy of that spell or ability, and we can choose new copies for the target, or new targets for the copy if we want. Oh no, I'm lying to you. We make a copy of that spell or ability for each other permanent or player that the spell or ability could target, and then each of those copies target something different. So if we have, let's say, a lightning bolt that's being pointed at one of our creatures, we can flash in Radiant Performer, flash it in either for its full value or by warping it in, and now we copy that lightning bolt for every permanent and player, any target, because lightning bolt hits any target. That will kill the Radiant Performer, so maybe that's not the best option for us. But what if we have something that says Lava Axe, 5 damage just to a player? This is going to copy that for every player. So Radiant Performer has a lot of interesting uses we can bring in, especially since it can copy our own spells and abilities. And we have a lot of abilities that target our opponents, so Radiant Performer, we can flash her in to target all of our opponents. Just very useful in different ways. A little antithetical to the not having to make choices bit about Tannuk, but a lot of fun regardless. Next up, we have the Might Stone and Weak Stone. This is really fun. For 5 generic, we have a legendary Power Stone that says when it enters, we choose either to draw 2 cards or to give target creature -5/-5 until end of turn. And the Might Stone Weak Stone can tap for 2 Power Stone mana, which is to say, colorless mana that can't be used to cast non-artifact spells. So we can use it on abilities if we want to, or we could use it on artifact spells, which we have a lot of. But we might want to warp this in for 2 and a red. When we do, we're going to get that draw or removal effect. And then we can tap it for mana if we want to, and use that mana if we want to warp in an artifact. We just pay the extra red, and then these 2 are us casting an artifact spell. So we get bonus mana off of this after having warped it in itself. And then, on a later turn, we can play this again, draw 2 more cards, maybe kill another creature, and then of course it taps for that mana again. Next up, from the Final Fantasy set, we have Clive, Ifrit's Dominant. I don't know anything about Final Fantasy, I don't know who this guy is, but he seems dangerous, because he's 4 and double red for a 5/5 human noble warrior that says when he enters, we may discard our hand and then draw cards equal to our devotion to red, which means we count up the red pips in all of our permanents on the battlefield, and that is our devotion to red. So we might be discarding a hand of 5 or 6 and drawing 15, depending on how much we have out there. If we have warped things in, we might have a lot more because we didn't spend that much to get them out. And remember, if we warp in Clive, we only spent 2 and a red to cast him. He still has a casting cost of 4 and double red. So we'll be able to count those 2 red toward our devotion in any case. So even if he's all we have, we discard our card, we can draw 2. Then Clive also says, for 4 and double red, we can tap him and exile him and return him to the battlefield transformed as a sorcery, which makes him into this Saga creature. Immediately he'll come in as a 9/9 Saga demon and fight up to 1 other target creature. So this is probably removal. There's pretty unlikely for the only thing for us to be able to fight is something bigger than a 9/9. And then for the next 2 turns, this is triggering at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase because it's a Saga, and we're just going to add 4 red. 4 red is 1 more than we need to warp something in, so that's great. And if this has 3 or more lore counters on it, which it will on the 3rd chapter, we'll exile it and return to the battlefield face up. So we'll get Clive back, meaning the second time this chapter ability triggers, when it's chapter 3, we'll get 4 red, and then Clive will re-enter, and we'll be able to discard our hand, draw cards equal to our devotion to red. It's all happening during our main phase, so we still have that red mana to spend. So if we really wanted to flip Clive again, it only costs us 2 more, since we've already got 4 red floating. All of this is great. If we really feel like it though, we can warp Clive in for 2 and a red thanks to Tannuk, and immediately, because he has haste thanks to Tannuk, spend 4 and 2 red more to exile them and return him as Ifrit, Warden of Inferno. Because he's exiled in the process and then returns as this side, he won't leave the battlefield at the end of turn due to warp. So that's a lot of mana. That's, 9 mana. But if we have 9 mana and we're willing to spend it, we can maybe draw a bunch of cards, remove something, have a 9/9 to block, and have some mana to spend on our next couple of turns. Seems worth it to me. Next, we have a classic, Combustible Gear Hulk. Also 4 and double red, we get a 6/6 first striking construct that says when it enters, target opponent may have us draw 3 cards. If they don't, will mill 3 cards, and they will take damage equal to the total mana value of those cards. We have so many big creatures in this deck, so many big artifacts. They're gonna know we have so many big things because we've been warping them in. Maybe we warp this in. So for 2 and a red, thanks to Tannuk, we get a 6/6 first strike haste that does this effect. Maybe it's drawing us 3 cards, it's just a free brainstorm, or it's doing a boatload of damage to our opponent. Then at the end of turn, it'll go away, and we'll get it again whenever we want to cast it for the 4 and a red on a later turn. Next we have Duplicant. I think this card is great for a deck like this. For 6 generic mana, we have a 2/4 artifact shapeshifter. So this is not a red creature, but it is an artifact, so we can cast it with warp. That says Imprint. When it enters, we may exile target non-token creature. We just exile a creature. It's not one of ours. It can be, I suppose, but we just get rid of a creature that our opponent controls. And then, as long as a card exiled with Duplicant is a creature card, Duplicant has that creature's power, toughness, and creature types, although it's still a shapeshifter. So that's a nice bonus, I suppose. Maybe we've gotten rid of a big scary dragon, like a 5/5 dragon, which means Duplicant would be a 5/5 dragon shapeshifter. It won't have any of the other abilities of that creature, but that creature is just gone. This is not an O-ring effect, where if Duplicant leaves the battlefield, that creature comes back. So we might be warping this in for 2 and a red, just getting rid of something, and now we have Duplicant as a hasty creature with power and toughness equal to the thing we got rid of. Then it leaves at the end step, and we can cast it on a later turn for its casting cost. Do it all again. Next, we have another flash card, but it is an artifact, so we can warp it in. I love Embercleave. Embercleave is 4 and double red for a legendary equipment with flash that equips for 3, but it costs 1 less for each attacking creature we control. Which means if during combat we attack with 2 creatures, we can warp this in for a single red. And when Embercleave enters, we attach it to a creature we control, and that creature gets +1/+1, double strike, and trample. So maybe we have a 6/6 creature like, Combustible Gear Hulk, or Itali, which we'll talk about in a moment. We attack with Combustible Gear Hulk and, let's say, Clive, and then before blocks or after blocks, doesn't really matter, we flash in Embercleave for a single red, since we're attacking with 2 things, with its warp ability. Combustible Gear Hulk becomes a 7/7 double striking trample creature. Does all that damage, and then Embercleave will leave the battlefield thanks to warp at our end step, and we can flash it in again later. Maybe our opponents will forget that one of their fellows got slammed in the face with Embercleave, and on a later turn, we'll attack with 4 creatures, and Embercleave, even though it's in exile, it still has its cost reduction ability. So we can cast it for simply 2 red for attacking with 4 creatures, flash it in again. I think that seems really fun. Next up is Itali, Primal Storm, a classic. Itali is 4 and double red for a 6/6 legendary elder dinosaur that says when he attacks, he attacks, it attacks, she attacks? I don't know Itali's pronouns. When Itali attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, and we may cast any number of spells from among those cards for free. So we warp Itali in for 3 and a red. We attack right away. We get to cast spells off of everyone's library, assuming we don't get all lands. And then Itali, of course, is still attacking. If they don't die, they leave at our end step because of warp, and we cast them again on another turn. Something worth mentioning, of course, Tannuk doesn't say creatures that you've warped in have haste. It says creatures you control have haste. So if we play Itali on a later turn, Itali can still attack again right away for its mana value, or mana cost rather. So yeah. Next we have Fiendish Duo, which costs the same amount, 4 and double red. It is a 5/5 devil with first strike that says if a source would deal damage to an opponent, it deals double that damage to that player instead. This does not say if a source we control would deal damage to an opponent. It just defines all the other players in the game as our opponents and says all of these players now take double damage from any source. Just says a source. Doesn't talk about the controller, doesn't talk about the color of the source, whatever it may be. So we attack with our Fiendish Duo, and it doesn't double damage against our opponent's creatures or other permanents. But against our opponents, yeah, that seems pretty great. Especially because we have, a 5/5 first strike that's now attacking, let's say. Our opponent might say, yeah, I don't want to sacrifice any of my creatures by chump blocking with them. I'll just let it through. We say, okay, which they might do, of course, because this is a first striker. They're not going to be able to trade with it, likely. And they let it through. We just do 10 to them. That's 25% of their starting life total. That, combined with all of our other things going on, like Embercleave giving double strike and trample, Itali just being a big boy, or big girl, we don't know. To be continued, Otali. Next up, Furbolg Flautist from Baldur's Gate. Really cool card. For 4 and double red, we have a 4/4 Giant Bard with Enthralling Performance. When it enters, we gain control of a creature we don't control until end of turn. We untap that creature and it gains haste and myriad until end of turn. Which means when we attack with that creature, we make a copy of it for every other player that it's not attacking. So every other opponent, that is. So if we have 3 opponents, we attack opponent A with this creature, we'll make a copy that's tapped and attacking for opponent B and another one for opponent C. It doesn't have to attack those players. It can attack a planeswalker they control if we want, but probably we're going after the players, assuming they're not playing like a Super Friends deck. But we'd steal the biggest, scariest thing they have, hit every player with it, including the owner of it, and then, since we've just warped the Flautist in, it will go away. And we can do that again next turn or a later turn. Seems fun. Next we have Inferno Titan. Inferno Titan, another classic. 4 and double red for a 6/6 giant that has fire breathing. Pay a red and it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. But also when it enters or attacks, it deals 3 damage divided as we choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. So that could just be a lightning bolt to something. Or it could be, 1 point of damage to 3 different things. Or, 2 and a 1, however we want to do it. Best of all, Tannuk gives haste. So we're able to do this twice, assuming we can warp in the Inferno Titan and then attack with it. Or just cast it and attack with it. So this is another classic example of an enters trigger that we might want to double up on by flickering, by using our Mirror of Life stealing, either way. And we can, if we have extra mana lying around, pump it into the Inferno Titan with fire breathing. Pretty good. Next, we have Nalfashni. I play Dungeons & Dragons, but I don't know how to pronounce this. I've never had to say it. Nalfashni is 5 and a red for a 4/6 Beast Demon for Baldur's Gate. It has flying, and it says whenever we cast a spell from exile, we copy it. We can choose new card targets for the copy. If it's a permanent, the copy gains haste and says at the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice this permanent. So this is one of our many other ways to make copies of our creatures. But this is every creature, or I guess artifact as well, that we're casting from exile. We have a few different ways to do that, like the Professional Facebreaker can let us exile cards from the top of our library and play them this turn, but mostly this is just for warp. Once we've warped something in and it's warped out at the end of turn, on a later turn, Nalfashni lets us make a copy of it when we cast it, and that copy also has haste. We won't have it for more than just the one turn, but that seems pretty good. And maybe this is an artifact, so we're able to do something like double up on our Fire Crystal discount. That seems fun. Next we have Overlord of the Boiler Bilges from Duskmourn. For 4 and double red, we get a 5/5 Avatar Horror. It's a creature, but it's also an enchantment that says when it enters or attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target. So that's good removal. If we've got haste on it, which we do thanks to Tannuk, that's going to be a total of 8 damage to any target. That's 1/5 of an opponent's starting life total. And it has Impending 4 for 2 and double red. which is to say we can cast it for its impending cost. It'll come in with 4 time counters on it, and as long as it has time counters on it, it's not a creature. And then at our end step, we take a time counter off of it. So if we want, we can use Tannuk's ability to warp this in for 2 and a red. It comes in, it does 4 damage to any target. We attack with it, it does 4 damage to any target again. Hopefully, it doesn't die. And then at end step, it'll go to the exile zone thanks to warp. Next turn, we can impending it from exile for its impending cost. It comes back in, and it's another 4 damage to any target. We can, of course, cast it for 4 and double red as just a creature, which will give it haste because Tannuk gives our creatures haste. But if we want, we can save a little mana by just impending it, and it comes in, and we can wait a few turns for it to become a creature again. It's just nice to be able to see how impending interacts with warp. All right, next up we have Scourge of the Throne. Scourge of the Throne is 4 and double red for a 5/5 flying dragon with Dethrone, which is whenever this creature attacks the player with the most life or tied for the most life, it gets a counter, a 1/1 counter. So nothing to do with the Monarch, but it lets us say whoever is doing best on life, they need to be taken down a peg. It also says whenever this creature attacks for the first time each turn, if it's attacking the player with the most life or tied for the most life, untap all attacking creatures, and after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So this is a 6 mana flyer, which Tannuk will give haste, and we can do that right away and get 2 attacks in, but we can also warp this in for 2 and a red, and out of nowhere, for cheap, we're getting multiple attacks. And we might be able to do this with multiple creatures warped in. Scourge of the Throne is just really solid. In addition, something worth noting, if we have multiple creatures we're attacking with, whether or not they're warped in, only Scourge of the Throne needs to attack the player with the most life or tied for the most life in order for us to get that extra combat. Our other creatures that maybe we've warped in can attack other things. Other creatures or other players, planeswalkers, battles, whatever we want. Probably we're not attacking any battles because at time of recording, there are no battles that aren't sieges, which we'd want to attack it for ourselves, and, we didn't put any in this deck, but still. Next, we have Stormscale Scion. Stormscale Scion is another dragon for 4 and double red. It's a 4/4 flyer. It gives all of our other dragons +1/+1. How many other dragons are we running in this deck? We have a total of 5, including the Scion. So, pretty nice. Helps the Scourge of the Throne, helps the Dragon Mage, 2 others. But not just 2 others, because Stormscale Scion has Storm, which means when we cast it, we make a copy of the spell for each other spell we've cast this turn. So if Stormscale Scion is the 3rd spell we've cast, we get 2 other Stormscale Scions on the stack. They'll all resolve, and each of them will give +1/+1 to each other. Meaning these Stormscale Scions, if we have 3 copies, like I said, with 2 copies in the original, that is, they're all 6/6s because it says other dragons get +1/+1. So 2 of them applying to the 3rd. So if we warp this in, it's pretty easy for us to pay less mana for it, obviously. It's half as much to warp it in, which means we've likely warped in other things since Tannuk kind of, as long as we're willing to warp these things, sets the mana cost for many of our spells at 3. If we've got 9 mana we're sitting on, which we likely will at some point, we can cast 2 other spells before Stormscale Scion, cast the Stormscale Scion, it comes in, we get 3 of them. One of them has to leave at the end of turn. The other 2, I don't think that they do. They might. Good question about Void. But even if they don't, these will be able to give our other dragons a buff, and on the next turn, we'll be able to cast, or a later turn at least, we'll be able to cast Stormscale Scion for its full mana cost, get even more value out of it that way. Next we have Trumpeting Carnosaur. 4 and double red, which we've seen before, for a 7/6 dinosaur with trample. And when it enters the battlefield, we discover 5. Discover is sort of like Cascade, but rather than happening when it's on the stack, it happens when the Trumpeting Carnosaur enters the battlefield. So it's already resolved, it's already hit the field. When it happens, we exile cards from the top of our library until we hit something that is mana value 5 or less, and we can cast that if we want to. If we don't cast it, we can put it in our hand, and then everything else we've exiled goes on the bottom of our library. So Trumpeting Carnosaur is another way for us to just get value when we warp this in, because its discover number is not based on its mana cost. Just like if we were to cascade something, even if we're warping it in, we'd be cascading based on its own mana value, not the cost we paid for it. But if we don't want to warp this, we can pay 2 in a red and just discard it to do 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. A little bit of removal. But remember, we can't discard from exile. So if we want to warp this in and then let it leave the battlefield from warp at the end of turn, let it go to exile, we're going to have to cast it again, because we can't pay the 2 in a red and discard it for the 3 damage when it's not in our hand, which is to say when it's in exile thanks to being warped. Something to remember. Next up is Dragon Mage. Dragon Mage, just a great old card. 5 and double red for a 5/5 flying dragon wizard. It's a wizard. That says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, each player discards their hand and draws 7. So we just get to wheel. It's pretty nice. Dragon Mage, we can cast it for just 3 mana by warping it in. Attack. Hopefully there's no blockers in the air. This lets us get rid of our hand and draw 7 more cards, which helps us warp other things in, maybe that same turn, maybe the next turn. Just seems good. And then we can, of course, cast it for its mana cost on a later turn. Next we have, Drakoseth. Love Drakoseth. For 4 and triple red, we get a 7/7 legendary dragon with flying that says when it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. So if Drakoseth isn't blocked and we throw that 4 damage at the defending player, we're just doing 7 damage. And it might be out of nowhere if we warp this in with Tannuk and give Drakoseth haste. I mean, we don't even have to warp it in if we want to just have it to have haste, because Tannuk gives it to all our creatures. And then we're lightning bolting 2 other targets. Maybe we're killing creatures, maybe we're just having our other opponents catch strays. But we can also say we're going to throw 4 damage at a creature and 3 damage at 2 other creatures. Just raise the field. And that's Drakoseth in general. Being able to warp this in is deeply impactful and a lot of fun. And then of course we can just cast Drakoseth again, maybe next turn, and be able to hastily attack with it again, assuming Tannuk is still around. Next, from the Doctor Who decks, we have Flaming Tyrannosaurus. Big surprise, this is a dinosaur. It is a 5/5 menace for 5 and double red that says Paradox. When we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, this creature deals 3 damage to any target, and you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Which is to say, every time we've let something warp out at the end of our end step, when we cast it later from exile, Flaming Tyrannosaurus lightning bolts something and gets bigger. And when the Tyrannosaurus dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So it's not removal because it's not hitting permanents, but it might be player removal. I mean, that's an 1/8 of everyone's starting life total at base. It might be more if it's gotten bigger because it's already lightning bolting things because we're casting things from somewhere other than our hand, and this is getting counters. Just a lot of fun here, and who doesn't want a Flaming Tyrannosaurus walking around on their board? It seems good. Next, I think this one's really cool. Havoc Eater is a 3/3 flying elemental for 5 and double red, but hear me out. When it enters, for each opponent, goad up to 1 target creature that opponent controls and put 1/1 counters on the Havoc Eater equal to those creatures' power, like combined power. So if we goad, 3 4/4s, we'll put 12 1/1 counters on this, and it's a 15/15 flyer. Did I mention that we can warp this in? So not only are we warping it in and maybe getting, more than 10/10 flyer with haste, which we can attack with right away, but also those creatures are goaded whether or not the Havoc Eater stays on the battlefield. So we're not going to get attacked by them unless we only have 1 opponent remaining. So this is a little bit of protection, but more importantly, it's a big flyer. It's a big bird or elemental, It looks like it could easily be a Phoenix, but I guess it's an elemental. In any case, seems very cool, seems fun to warp in. I like it. Next, we have Ingenuity Engine. This is a 7 mana artifact, but it has Cascade. So when we cast it, we get to exile things until we hit a spell that costs 6 or less. It, again, doesn't matter if we warp this in for 2 and a red. This still has a mana cost of 7 generic mana. It's not what we paid for it, it's what the cost is. We're having a discount because we have an alternate cost. And then we can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice an artifact to return one of our artifacts to our hand. An artifact we control to its owner's hand, that is. Which means if we want to sacrifice a different artifact, we can bounce Ingenuity Engine and then recast it, or maybe rewarp it, and get that Cascade again. We could sacrifice the Ingenuity Engine, it's true, to bounce a different artifact. And we have a few artifacts we might want to just get rid of. Maybe is worth it. But Ingenuity Engine is really here just to give us big cascades over and over. From being warped, that is. Because we can warp it in for 2 and a red, and then pay 1 more, tap it, and sack a different artifact to bounce it. And maybe we warp it again that turn, maybe we warp it in next turn when we have another artifact to sacrifice. It works. Next, we have Knoll Spine Dragon from the Lord of the Rings Commander decks. For 5 and double red, we get a 7/5 dragon with flying that says when it enters, we can discard our hand and draw cards equal to the damage dealt to target opponent this turn. So this is a creature we probably want to either warp in or just cast post-combat. If we've warped in 2 other things and been able to do a whole bunch of damage to an opponent, we can then warp this in and draw that same whole bunch of cards. Then this warps away and we've got it available for us on a later turn. Seems like a good way to spend 3 mana and draw a bunch of cards just post-combat. We also have Meteor Golem. Love Meteor Golem. 7 generic for a 3/3 golem. When it enters, destroy a non-land permanent opponent controls. Just essentially unconditional removal. We just can't hit lands with it. Which, who's blowing up lands in Commander anyway without doing it in like a strategic way? I think Meteor Golem is a lot of fun, and warping it in means we get a 3/3 that we can attack with this turn if we want to. But a 3/3 for 3 that's blowing something up. Maybe we warp this in, blow something up, and then we use the Ingenuity Engine to sacrifice it, bounce the Ingenuity Engine, and warp that back in. Seems like a good combination. Next, we have one of our spacecraft. Pinnacle Killship is a 7 generic mana spacecraft that says when it enters, it deals 10 damage to up to 1 target creature. Just superlative removal for something that's not just enormous. Just seems really good. Being a spacecraft, the Killship has Station, which means we can tap creatures we control to put counters equal to their power on the spacecraft, only as a sorcery. And once this has 7 or more charge counters, it is a 7/7 flyer. 7/7 flyer isn't anything to sneeze at. Obviously, we probably don't want to do this once on the turn we've warped it in, but we could if we're warping in several things that are really huge that we don't feel like we want to attack with. We can warp them in, whether or not the Killship is also warped in. If we're not using them to attack, or we're not having to tap to do so, we can tap before they warp out to put counters on the Killship. And those counters will stay there, and eventually we'll have our 7/7 flyer to menace our opponents from the skies. Even better is this Extinguisher Battleship. For 8 generic mana, we get a spacecraft that says when it enters, we destroy target non-creature permanent. Boom. It can't be a creature, but it can be a land. It can be an artifact, it could be an enchantment. As long as it's not a creature, it's blown up. And then we do 4 damage to each creature. That means our creatures too. That's unfortunate. But it's blowing up an awful lot of the board. And I should make mention, Tannuk is a 3/5, so he's not gonna die to it. The Extinguisher Battleship is a little bit of a board wipe. Not a perfect one, but pretty good, especially when we're blowing up a non-creature permanent in addition. We have Station for this as well, but it only has to station up to 5 to become a creature. And once it is, it's a flying, trampling 10/10. This is a battleship, not just in name only. So, Last in our warp section is the Myojin of Roaring Blades from the Kamigawa Commander decks. For 5 and triple red, we get a 7/4 Legendary Spirit that enters with an indestructible counter if we cast it from our hand. Again, warping something in is simply an alternate casting cost. We are casting it, it's coming out of our hand. This is going to come in with an indestructible counter on it. And if we remove that indestructible counter, it will deal 7 damage to up to 3 targets. That might be 7 damage to each of our 3 opponents' faces. Or it could be 7 damage to 3 different creatures, probably killing at least one of them, maybe all of them. If we warped this in, we can attack with it, have it hit, and maybe either do damage to an opponent or hopefully kill something while not dying itself because it's indestructible. Then after combat, we remove that indestructible counter, hits 3 things for 7 damage each. Maybe we're hitting whatever creature they blocked with that didn't die because it had a toughness of 8 or more. And then it's going to leave the battlefield at the end step because we warped it in, and we can do it all again by paying its mana cost on a later turn. Myojin of Roaring Blades is just a sort of a quintessential card for this deck. Like, it's dangerous, it's intimidating, and we're only paying 3 mana for it, so it's even better. That covers all of our warped cards, the cards that we have tagged with warp. We're going to go into our support section now and talk about card advantage. I've labeled it draw here. This is just something I do to make it simple and fast for me to label things, but this is our card advantage section. So we're going to start with Mind Stone. Mind Stone is 2 generic mana for an artifact that taps for colorless. Pretty good ramp. But we can also, if we need to, pay 1 and tap it and sack it to draw a card. Gives us a little bit of draw, that seems fine. Zoyoyo's Justice from LCI is 1 and a red for an instant that says the owner of target artifact or creature with mana value 1 or greater shuffles it into their library, and then they discover X, where X is the mana value of the artifact or creature shuffled in. So this isn't actually horrible removal. Like, they might, our opponent might discover into something better than we got rid of, but that's always a risk. But it's even better for us, because if we take something like, let's say, Pig Daddy, we warp this in, we get all the benefits from it by attacking with it, and then we cast Zoyowa's Justice, pardon me, to shuffle it into our library, and we're going to discover 5 from it. That seems pretty good. We'll find something good. We have a lot of big things that we can warp in for 3, and then just cast 2 more and find something better, or at least as good, probably, with this little 2 mana spell. So it's a removal spell if we really need it, but it turns something we warped in and are going to lose at least until a later turn into something that we just have now. Pretty okay. Brass's Tunnel Grinder. I think this card is great in this deck. We have several different instances, as you've seen, of Discover. This is another one. For 2 and a red, we have a legendary artifact that enters the battlefield and lets us discard any number of cards, and then we can draw that many +1. So we're getting a little bit of card advantage out of it. But then, at the beginning of our end step, if we descended this turn, which means if a permanent card was put into our graveyard from anywhere, then we put a boar counter on Brass's Tunnel Grinder. And if there are 3 or more boar counters, I'll just do it this way. As part of this, the resolution of this ability, we transform it into Tekadlon, there you go, the Searing Rift. It is a land, it taps for red, and whenever we cast a permanent spell using mana produced by it, we discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. So that seems really cool. This is an instance of Discover when the thing we're discovering from is still on the stack as opposed to on the battlefield, because this is a cast trigger. Kind of a neat little wrinkle there. But in any case, the mana value of a spell is not the same as the mana cost. So if we use this to warp something in that is mana value 8, even though we're paying only 3 to warp it in, we're going to discover 8, not 3, because that's the spell's mana value, not its mana cost. Very useful for repeated discovery. We can get a lot more things onto the battlefield that way, and even without it, it lets us throw away some cards we're not thinking we're going to use now, and if we throw away none, we still draw just the +1. Seems okay. I didn't put this in the warp section, but we absolutely could, if we really are desperate for card draw, warp the Tunnel Grinder in for the same cost that it is. We'll get to discard any number of cards and draw that many +1. Then at end step, it will warp away and we can cast it again later. Just seems like, like I mentioned before, this is a card that can be warped, just maybe not the best choice, but there might be a use for it. Next up, we have Hazaret's Monument. For 3 generic mana, we have a legendary artifact that makes all of our red creatures cost 1 generic mana less to cast. That's a casting cost reduction. And warp is a casting cost, an alternate cost, but a casting cost nonetheless. So if we want to warp in a red creature, with this on the battlefield, it only costs us 1 in a red. Seems pretty good. And whenever we cast that creature, or any creature spell, we can discard a card, and if we do, we draw a card. So it's not actually card advantage because we're having to discard first in order to draw that card, but maybe we want to cycle through something. That's pretty good. And the cost reduction is pretty sweet as well. We've seen the Professional Facebreaker and how it can make treasures for us, and use those treasures to give us impulse draw, so that's a little bit of card advantage. Seize the Spoils is one of a couple of cards that does a similar effect. For 2 and a red, we get a sorcery that requires us as an additional cost to discard a card, but then we draw 2 cards and make a treasure token. Again, it's not technical card advantage because we are discarding a card and casting this one, so it costs us 2 and we're drawing 2, but we get a treasure token out of it, and maybe it's cards that we want. Seems good to me. Similarly, Big Score is sort of like the big brother of Seize the Spoils. It costs an extra generic, but it makes an extra treasure, and it's an instant. So 4 and a red, we discard a card, we draw 2 and make 2 treasures. Pretty great. Thanks, Nuka-Penna. Next, we have Koth, Fire of Resistance. This is a Planeswalker. For 2 and double red, we get a 4 loyalty legendary Koth. The card advantage of this is for +2, we can search our library for a basic mountain, reveal it, put it in our hand, and shuffle. That's just us drawing a card, and it's a card we're always going to want more of because it gets it out of our deck, even though deck thinning isn't really a thing in Commander, but it means we always make our land drop. We can also -3 Koth to deal damage equal to target creature, equal to the number of mountains we control, which the first ability is helping, but I mean, if we're able to cast Koth, we probably have at least 2 mountains in play, and probably more as we've gone, so this is good removal. And his ultimate is we get an emblem that says whenever a mountain we control enters, the emblem deals 4 damage to any target. Come on, just free removal with landfall? That seems great. Plus, it's a Planeswalker. People just don't like Planeswalkers. They attack them, they use removal on them, so this is removal bait. We don't need to worry about it. Pretty nice. Just keep in mind, Planeswalkers, even though they are people, are not creatures. So Koth is not a red creature, we cannot warp Koth in. We've seen the Sad Robot. Gives us card draw in the form of drawing a card once it dies. Unexpected Windfall is exactly the same card as Big Score, except that it costs 2 and 2 red instead of 3 and 1 red. But an instant makes us discard a card, we draw 2 and make 2 treasures. We've seen Nalarg. Gives us card advantage in the form of just putting creatures on the battlefield, even though we get to put it back at the end of turn. Reforge the Soul is, this is such a cool card. For 3 and double red, we have a sorcery that says each player discards their card and discards their hand rather, and draws 7 cards. So just a nice wheel. But it has Miracle for 1 and a red, which means we can cast it for its miracle cost when we draw it, if it's the first card we drew this turn. So be careful when you're drawing your card, don't just draw the card into your hand without looking. During your turn, take a look at your card when you draw it, and if it's Reforge the Soul, just slap it on the table, pay your 1 in red, and cast it for 2. It doesn't matter what else was in your hand, you're probably going to draw something better. It seems great. Next up, we've seen the Mindstone and Weakstone, and how it can draw us cards as like a kind of expensive divination, or exactly divination if we're warping it in. We've seen Clive, and how he can again let us discard our hand and draw cards equal to our devotion to red. Combustible Gear Hulk is a little bit of a... did I call it Brainstorm earlier? Good grief, I mean Ancestral Recall. Just comes with it, seems good. And Atali lets us grab cards off of the top of everyone's library, including our own. Next, we have Sunbird's Invocation, which I think is so cool. 5 and a red for an enchantment that says whenever we cast a spell from our hand, we reveal the top X cards of our library, where X is the mana value of the spell we cast. We can then cast a spell with that mana value or less from among the revealed cards for free, and then the rest of the cards go on the bottom of our library in a random order. So this is us, when we have Sunbird's Invocation in play, if we warp in a card with mana value 7, we get to reveal the top 7 cards of our library and cast from among those 7 a spell with mana value 7 or less for free. It doesn't matter that we only spent 2 and a red to warp that spell in. Before it even resolves, we get the Sunbird's Invocation trigger and we get to cast something else. Just every time we do this. Every time we cast a spell from our hand. It's 6 mana, but it's 100% worth it. It pays for itself over the course of 2 or 3 turns, maybe. Probably even 2 turns. Maybe even 1 turn, if we're able to warp something in that same turn. So, we've seen the Trumpeting Carnosaur and how it can discover for us, which is card advantage. Dragon Mage, we've seen it lets us wheel. Ingenuity Engine is Cascade. It lets us cascade, so that's card advantage. The Knoll Spine Dragon, we've seen, it lets us discard our hand and draw a bunch of cards if we've done some damage. But now, let's take a look at this room. Charred Foyer and Warped Space. So if you haven't seen the Duskmourn rooms, they are a split card where both sides are permanents, which means when you cast it, you cast one side or the other, and the card will come in with that side, that door it's called, unlocked. It means that is the entirety of the text on the card as far as the game is concerned. And at sorcery speed, we can unlock the other side, which is to say we just pay its cost, its casting cost, and now both sides are available to us. So if we play it as the Charred Foyer, it costs 3 and a red, and it comes in and says at the beginning of our upkeep, we exile the top card of our library, and we can play it this turn. That's our card advantage. A little bit of impulse draw. This is great, but it's also nice that we can then later pay 6 mana, 4 and double red. If we want to do the Foyer first, of course we can do the Warp Space first. But Warped Space, because we're warping things in space, it says once each turn you may pay 0 generic mana rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cast from exile. So this is us warping things in, and on a later turn using Warped Space once per turn to get it for free out of warp, out of the exile zone. Really cool, and I love how it happens to thematically connect to Tannuk. This is just A+ game design. So that is our card advantage section. What's next? It's acceleration. Let's take a look at acceleration. And again, I've just used the word ramp to represent that this is acceleration. It's just a shorthand. Everyone knows Soul Ring. Costs 1, makes 2, we want it in our deck. Wayfarer's Bauble is here because it's our rampant growth in mono red. I know you're looking at these numbers and saying, wow, that's an awful lot more than the 10 you say you need. It's because there's so much overlap in this deck, so much synergy, it just works really well for us, and all of these cards would count as some kind of acceleration. Anyway, Wayfarer's Bauble costs 1, we pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice it, and we can find a basic mountain, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. This is a lander token, if you want to think of it that way, since we're in a Tannuk deck. Arcane Signet costs 2, adds 1 mana of any color, which is to say red. So it's a 2 mana rock, it makes red. Fire Diamond is the same thing, but it comes in tapped. The fact that it comes in tapped is not terrible, because this redundancy. 2 of the cards in our 100 card deck are 2 mana rocks that make the color that is our commander. Sounds good. Mind Stone, we've already seen, it does the same thing, except that it makes generic mana, or colorless mana rather, but we can pay 1 tap and sack it to draw a card later if we want to. We've seen the Cursed Mirror, and how that can be a manalith for us, making red. Hazoret's Monument discounts our red creature spells. Professional Facebreaker makes treasure. This is all ramp for us. So is Seize the Spoils making treasure, Big Score making treasure. Defiler of Instinct turns 1 of the red pips in our red permanents into Phyrexian mana, kind of. That's ramp. Now we can talk about Nyx Lotus. Sorry about earlier. For 4 generic mana, Nyx Lotus is a legendary artifact that comes in tapped, but then when we tap it, we can choose a color and add an amount of mana equal to our devotion to that color of that color. So if we have a devotion of 5 to red, then we tap this and it makes 5 red. This is just a really good mana rock and we can't use it right away, so warping it in is not that helpful, but being able to have it at all, I mean, the likelihood of being able to warp something in that has 2 or maybe 3 red pips, and then just that adds to what Nyx Lotus can tap for. So maybe we tap 3 mountains to cast something with 3 red pips in it using warp, and now it's sort of paid for itself because Nyx Lotus can tap this turn at least for 3 more red since it contributes to that devotion. We can warp something else in. The Sad Robot goes and finds us a mountain. Fire Crystal discounts our red spells by a generic mana. Unexpected Windfall makes treasure. Elena, as we've seen, makes a lot of red mana for us based on the greatest power of creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. We also have Mana Geyser. Mana Geyser, much like some of these other cards like Elena, gives us temporary mana. It's just not repeatable. This is a ritual that is 3 and double red for a sorcery that gives us an amount of red mana for each tapped lands our opponents control. That's a lot of mana in this game. How many people pass their turn with only a few lands in play and only a few lands tapped? We're probably going to get at least 5 mana off of this. And obviously if we're not going to, we won't cast it. Seems pretty good. Turn 5 mana into probably 6 minimum, which is to say 2 warps. So that's like a little discount. Maybe a lot more than that. Mana Geyser is really fun. The Might Stone and Weak Stone can tap for Power Stone mana, of course. We've seen Clive and how Clive on his backside makes 4 red mana on chapters 2 and 3. And then, of course, Warped Space ramps us in the form of making us pay 0 generic for spells we cast from exile once each turn. So that is our acceleration section. Now let's do our interaction, which, again, I just shorthand as removal. We're a mono red deck. Why wouldn't you run Lightning Bolt? You know, there are cheaper versions of Lightning Bolt in terms of currency. I run the Strixhaven Mystical Archive print because it's beautiful. A Braid, I put in a lot of my red decks as well. For 1 and a red, it's an instant that says either deal 3 damage to target creature or destroy an artifact. That's pretty flexible. Zoyoa's Justice, pardon me, like I mentioned before, is not really in this deck as a removal spell, but we could use it as one. Kazul's Fury is a modal double-faced card. It is an expensive fling, 2 and a red, for an instant that lets us sacrifice a creature as an additional cost and deal damage equal to that sacrificed creature's power to any target. So this might be a way for us to warp something in, attack with it, do a bunch of damage, get our opponent down low in their life, and then we use Kazul's Fury to fling that warped creature and just kill our opponent off, or kill off a creature that we want to get rid of, whatever we need to do. Maybe we kill one opponent with this and kill a second one, or we kill one opponent with an attack and a second one with Kazul's Fury flinging that creature we warped in. But if we don't want any of that, it's a tap land. Adds red for us. We are not hurting on lands in this deck, but we have a lot of expensive cards, so having an MDFC is not terrible. As we've seen, the Defiler can ping things, which may not be great removal, but you never know. We might be casting multiple red permanents by warping them in, so we might be able to turn this into a Lightning Bolt or even better. Koth, of course, can deal damage with his -3 ability and with the emblem he gives us with his ultimate. Mirror of Life Trapping does remove creatures. When they come in, they get exiled. And if our opponent wants to use them at all, they've got to either cast another creature or wait till someone else casts one. So a little bit of slow removal, but there it is. Sarkhan's Unsealing. This card is so much fun. 4 and a red for an enchantment that says whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6, of which we have several, this enchantment deals 4 damage to any target. Again, that could be just burning our opponents, but it could be removing some of their creatures or planeswalkers or what have you. In addition, whenever you cast a creature spell with power 7 or greater, which I think we have 5 or 6 of those, this enchantment deals 4 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So this is another board wipe for us. Again, not a perfect board wipe, but we might warp in 2 creatures that have power 7 or greater in the same turn, which means this triggers twice, so that's 8 damage to each opponent and 8 damage to each creature and planeswalker they control. It doesn't hit our stuff. Sarkhan's Unsealing doesn't do anything on its own, But once we start warping things in, it doesn't matter what we've cast for it, it matters what the power of those creatures are. We've seen the Might Stone and Weak Stone, and how it can give something -5/-5 until end of turn. We've seen how Clive can, when he flips, he will fight something. That's removal. Duplicant just exiles a non-token creature. And Inferno Titan does 3 damage when it enters, or attacks, divided between 1, 2, or 3 targets. Overlord of the Boiler Bilges. Enters and attacks, does 4 damage to a target. Trumpeting Carnosaur, we can discard it to do 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. Drakaseth burns everything. I'm just trying to go back over these since we've seen them already. And of course the Flaming Tyrannosaurus, when it dies, does damage equal to its power to each opponent. So that's not really... Oh no, that's not the removal part. The removal part is the fact that when we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, it does 3 damage to any target. So it's just lightning bolting things. Meteor Golem enters and destroys a non-land permanent. Pinnacle Killship enters and does 10 damage to a creature. Extinguisher Battleship enters and destroys a non-creature permanent. And the Myojin, when we remove that indestructible counter, does 7 damage to each of up to 3 targets. So that is our removal section. Let's take a quick look at our Wraths. We've already seen them both. Sarkhan's Unsealing is a Wrath if we cast a creature spell with power 7 or greater. And Extinguisher Battleship is a Wrath in the sense that it does 4 damage to each creature. So, yeah. Did I miss talking about one of these? I did. I only talked about the Myojin. Silly me. Let's talk about these real quick. Ancient Stone Idol is 10 generic mana for a flash 12/12 golem. They cost 1 less for each attacking creature. It has trample, and when it dies, it makes a 6/2 colorless construct creature with trample. So if we warp this in, we can warp this in for just a single red, as long as we do so when we do it, if we do it with flash, while there's other attacking creatures. So this could be on our turn, but it's likely going to be on our opponent's turn. They attack us with at least 2 creatures. We can warp it in for a single red, since this reduces the warp cost. We block with the 12/12. At the end of that turn, it'll go away, and we can cast it on a later turn for 10 or less if we get the cost reduction again, which could either be from us attacking or someone else. And then finally, Darksteel Colossus. Can't believe I didn't talk about these already. Darksteel Colossus is an 11 mana artifact golem. It's an 11/11 trampler with indestructible that says if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, we reveal it, shuffle it into our library instead. So if we want to warp this in, we're paying 2 and a red to get an 11/11 trampling indestructible golem. That just does a lot of work. Then it goes away, and we have to cast it for 11 again later. But maybe we have a way to sacrifice it. We have a couple of ways to do that in this deck, of course. And when we do, it would be put into a graveyard, so instead we reveal it and shuffle it into our library. Maybe get it back later. Just a big thing. So alright, I don't think I missed any more of these. Good grief. In any case, we have one more section, which is our synergy section. We've seen a lot of these already, but we're going to go through them. Zoyoa's Justice, we've seen. It synergizes with this because it lets us take advantage of the fact that we're warping something in and then turn it into something else by shuffling that into our library and then discovering based on its mana value. Cursed Mirror takes advantage of things by we can get something really big in and then get its enters effects again. Erratic Portal lets us bounce our warped things, so we get their enters effects or the equivalent without them having to be warped away. Flame Shadow Conjuring, this is one we haven't seen. For 3 and a red, this is an enchantment that says whenever a non-token creature we control enters, we can pay a red, just 1 red. And if we do, we make a token that's a copy of that creature, it gains haste, and we exile at the next end step. So all we need is for one of our creatures to enter. We just pay a red and we get a second one. We can attack with it as well if it's our turn, which it probably will be. This is one more way that we get copies of our things, we get to double up on our triggers, just really useful. We've seen the Argosy and how it lets us cheat our warps by exiling the thing we warped in and getting it to come back without having to be warped away. The same is true of the Mirror and of the Conjurer's Closet. Wild Magic Sorcerer lets us cast things, lets us give Cascade to whatever we cast from exile the first time each turn, which we're going to be doing with the things that we warped away. Radiant Performer, we can use and warp in with Flash, and this is under the synergy section because we might be getting a sweet trigger from an Ender's ability, or from some other triggered ability, like Flaming Tyrannosaurus might be triggering, and it says it can do 3 damage to any target. We flash in the Radiant Performer, copy that ability, and we're doing 3 damage to every target. Now Feshni, also much like Wild Magic Sorcerer, cares about us casting spells from exile. We get to copy them, and if they're permanents, we get to do them. We get to make extra copies of them. So it's sort of doing a Flame Shadow Conjuring imitation. The Flaming Tyrannosaurus, again, cares about us casting things from somewhere other than our hand, so that's exile. Ingenuity Engine gives us an artifact sacrifice outlet, but also lets us keep cascading into things. So we're able to get more and more of our triggers that come from entering or from attacking or the like. And of course, finally, Warped Space synergizes in that we can take one of our things that we're casting from exile and just pay 0 rather than its mana cost to cast it once each turn. So that is the deck in terms of our spells. We're going to go over our lands pretty quick. It shouldn't take too long because it's monocolored. We're running 32 straight mountains. That's a lot. If you don't like the idea of running a base of 38 and you think, wow, it's monocolored and it's definitely red, I can definitely get by with fewer than those, we do have one modal double-faced card in here, the Fling, the Kazul card. So if you wanted to go down by 1, I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't go down by too much, because this is our curve. It is ridiculous. We've got 14 permanents that are mana value 6, and more that are more than that. We've got 14 other cards that are mana value 4, including our commander. Our average mana value is 5 if you're not counting lands. That's incredibly high. So to be able to cast these spells, to be able to cast our commander, we've got a 70% chance of it because we're running so much ramp and we have so many lands. Don't worry about the ramp, just think about the fact that we have so many lands. It's completely worth it to run this many. But if you want to tempt fate, you can. It's just, this is the deck that is probably not best for it. It's not like our curve tops out at 3. We're running Myriad Landscape because it gives us a little bit of ramp. Comes in tapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap and sack it to search for 2 basics that share a land type, which is say 2 of our mountains, and then put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. This is kind of expensive, it probably seems like, but it's actually fine because it's not costing us a spell to do so, and we're ending up with a single land drop giving us 2 lands in play that are both the colors that we want. Myriad Landscape is useful. Temple of the False God is the same thing. It is a soul ring on a land that just doesn't work until you have 4 other lands. So it doesn't feel good if you have it in your opening hand, unless you have, of course, 4 other lands. But once you have it, it's 1 land that makes 2 mana. That does great for you. I am not building decks for very competitive bods, so Temple might not be for those, but it sure is for this. And finally, we have these utility lands. I mentioned before, I don't typically run a lot of land destruction, but sometimes somebody is playing a Rogue's Passage, or a Glacial Chasm, or something that you really need to get off the board. Demolition Field lets you do that. It's a land that taps for colorless, or you can pay 2, tap and sack it to blow up a non-basic, and then your opponent can find a basic and put it in untapped, and then so do we. So neither of us are down a land, we just have a basic instead of our non-basics. Worth it for a little bit of spot removal there. Rogue's Passage is in here. It taps for a colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to make one of our creatures unblockable. That might, after all of our burn damage we're doing in this deck, mean the difference between an opponent losing or not. And we have such big things, sometimes we just don't want to be bothered with them being blocked. Spine Rock Knoll is really fun. This is a card with Hideaway 4, and it enters tapped. Hideaway means when it enters, we look at the top 4 of our library, we exile one face down under this, and the rest go on the bottom in a random order. This will, once it untaps, of course, tap for red. Well, we can also pay a red and tap it to play the card we exiled with it, as long as an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn. We're playing that card as part of the resolution of this ability, so that breaks timing restrictions. I believe, if I'm wrong, please tell me in the comments below. In any case, it just says if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn. It doesn't say that has to be by us or on our turn. So maybe opponent A hits opponent C for 10 damage, we can Spine Rock Knoll and maybe get out our Darksteel Colossus or whatever we have under this. In any case, it's pretty likely we're able to warp something out good on our turn and do 7 damage to an opponent, and then just 1 more mana and tapping the Spine Rock Knoll in addition, and we get to cast another spell. Seems pretty good. And it doesn't matter what that spell's mana cost was, so it might be one of our really expensive things. Finally, we have War Room. This is great in a monocolor deck. It taps for colorless, or we can pay 3 and tap it and pay life equal to the number of colors in our commander's color identity, which is to say 1, and draw a card. So tapping 4 lands and paying a single life to draw a card, we've got a lot of card advantage in this deck. But maybe we need it sometimes. Maybe we're just desperate for another land, or we really need a creature or something. War Room is there for us. And that about sums it up. Again, I'm going to be releasing a new Edge of Eternities Commander deck every Thursday until the Spider-Man set drops at the end of September. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or a style of the way you'd like to see me build it. So thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, magic is fun. You should play more Magic.